I was already halfway down the airplane aisle when the flight attendant stepped into my path like she'd dropped something. Her name tag said Marisol. She smiled the way people do when they're trying not to alarm you, then leaned in close enough that I could smell spearmint on her breath. "Pretend you're sick and get off the plane," she whispered. I blinked at her, waiting for the rest of the sentence, a punchline, a correction, anything. But her eyes didn't move. They held mine, steady and scared. Behind me, a passenger cleared his throat. Somewhere overhead, a bin slammed shut. The air in the cabin had that recycled, slightly metallic smell planes always have. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. Marisol's hands were shaking as she pretended to adjust a suitcase handle. She didn't look at the bag. She looked at me again. "Please," she whispered, even softer. "I'm begging you." A few rows up, I heard my son's voice, sharp, impatient. "Dad, you coming?" I didn't answer right away. I stood there with my boarding pass in my hand, feeling a calm kind of confusion settle over me. The odd part wasn't the whisper. The odd part was that it didn't feel impossible. It felt late. And as I stood in that aisle, I remembered something I hadn't thought about in years. A manila folder in my home office, tucked behind old grading rubrics, labeled with my name in someone else's handwriting. I hadn't opened it yet. I just knew it existed. Then Marisol took one slow breath and said, "Do it now." So I did. But to understand why I moved without arguing, you'd have to go back about an hour. Back to my house. Back to the moment my son and his wife decided I should take a trip I never asked for. That afternoon, I was in my study with a stack of old student essays spread out on my desk. I'd taught U.S. history for most of my life, and I kept certain papers the way other people keep postcards. The room smelled like lemon oil and old books. Sunlight came through the blinds in narrow bands and made the dust look heavier than it was. I'd gotten used to the quiet in that house. 8 months earlier, Evan and Lena moved in temporarily. That was the word they used. They were polite in the way people are polite when they don't want you asking questions. Doors closing softly, footsteps kept light, conversations held in the hallway, never in the room. That day I heard them come upstairs, not rushed, not casual either, a careful pace. Lena appeared first in my doorway with a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. Evan stood behind her with his hands in his pockets, staring at the side of my bookshelf like it had something urgent to say. "Ron," Lena said, using my first name the way she always did, like we were co-workers. "We were hoping to talk." I slid my reading glasses off slowly and set them beside the papers, a small habit. A pause that gave me time to watch. "About what?" I asked. Evan shifted his weight. "We've been thinking," he said, "about family, about spending time together." "Quality time," Lena added, sitting on the arm of my chair like it belonged to her. They hadn't asked me to have coffee in months. They hadn't asked how I was sleeping or whether my knee still ached in the mornings. But now they were here, smiling, leaning in. Something in my stomach tightened. Not fear exactly, more like recognition. "Where?" I asked. Lena's smile widened. "Seattle," she said quickly. "A week, just the three of us. Evan's been talking about it." Evan finally looked at me. His face had that forced brightness people wear when they're reading from a script they didn't write. "Remember when we went when I was a kid?" he said. "I thought it would be nice to do it again, just reset." I nodded once, slowly. I remembered the trip. I also remembered he complained the whole time. Rain, walking, museums. "You didn't like it," I said. He hesitated, then shrugged. "I was 12. Lena leaned forward, cheerful. "Everything's already handled. Flights, hotel. We just need you to say yes." That was the first detail that stuck. Already handled. A decision made without me. That night, Lena cooked dinner, something she never did. She moved around my kitchen too comfortably, opening drawers without looking, taking out my plates like she'd been the one paying the mortgage. Evan poured wine with a hand that trembled, just a little. When I asked how long they'd been planning it, he gave me a quick smile. "Just wanted it to be a surprise." Lena set a plate in front of me and said, casually, as if she were commenting on the weather, By the way, your life insurance is pretty solid, isn't it? $500,000? My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. The room went quiet in a way I could feel in my teeth. How do you know that? I asked. She cut her food into neat, even pieces. Evan mentioned it, she said lightly. I looked at my son. He stared at the table. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse anyone. I just placed my fork down and took a slow sip of water, watching them the way I used to watch students who were about to explain why their homework looked like someone else's handwriting. Later, when they went to bed, I walked back into the study and stood in the doorway for a moment, listening to the house settle. The old boards creaked the same way they always had. Nothing about the house had changed, but something about the people inside it had. By morning, my suitcase was out. And a few hours after that, I was walking onto a plane I didn't choose, headed to a city I didn't ask to see again, when a flight attendant with spearmint breath leaned in and told me to pretend I was sick. So I clutched my chest, took 2 unsteady steps, and let my face go pale. The crew moved fast. A wheelchair appeared. Voices layered over each other, professional, urgent, practiced. As they rolled me back into the terminal, I looked up at Evan and Lena one last time. They weren't worried. They looked disappointed. In the airport medical room, a paramedic checked my pulse and told me I was fine. Probably anxiety, he said, already reaching for the door. Through the small window, I watched the plane push back from the gate. Then the door clicked again. Marisol stepped inside and shut it behind her. We need to talk, she said quietly. Somewhere private. And then she reached for her phone. Marisol locked the door behind her with a soft click, the kind you barely hear unless you're listening for it. The medical room smelled like disinfectant and stale coffee. A vinyl chair stuck faintly to the back of my legs when I shifted. She didn't sit. She stood with her phone in both hands, thumbs resting on the screen like she was steadying herself. What I'm about to show you, she said, could cost me my job. I nodded once. Not permission, just acknowledgement. She pressed play. At first, there was nothing but tiled ceiling and echo, a public restroom somewhere in the terminal. The sound quality wasn't great, but the voices were clear enough. I recognized Lena immediately. It dissolves fast, she was saying, calm, practical, like she was explaining a spreadsheet. He won't taste anything. A pause, then Evan's voice, lower, tighter. And if something happens up there? That's the point, Lena replied. At altitude, heart events aren't unusual, limited response, harder to question. Another pause, the faint sound of a toilet flushing somewhere off-screen. 500, Evan said, after taxes. Still worth it, she said. Marisol stopped the video. The room felt very quiet after that, like the air itself had stepped back. I didn't speak right away. I waited for my body to react the way people expect it to. Shock, anger, fear. Instead, I noticed that my hands were steady. Where did you get this? I asked. She swallowed. I heard them talking while I was cleaning the restroom near their gate. I turned on my camera without thinking. She looked at the floor. I've been there before. I didn't ask what she meant. She answered anyway. 3 years ago, my dad fell down a staircase. Everyone said it was an accident, but he'd just changed his will. Someone had been helping him. She looked up then. I didn't have proof. I wasn't going to let that happen again. I nodded again, a little slower this time. They're on that plane right now, I said. Yes. They think this failed, I said. Yes. That matters, I said. She exhaled, like she'd been holding her breath since boarding started. What are you going to do? I looked at the scuffed linoleum floor, at the loose corner near the baseboard. Ordinary details have a way of anchoring you when things stop being ordinary. I'm going home, I said, and I'm going to check my paperwork. She wrote her number on a scrap of receipt paper and slid it across the counter. Her handwriting shook on the last digit. Call me, she said. If anything changes. I will, I said. When I left the airport, the taxi driver asked if I wanted to talk about missing my flight. No, I said. I didn't miss it. The ride back was quiet. The city moved past the windows like it always had. Same roads, same storefronts, same afternoon traffic. At home, the house felt different, not unsafe, just observed. I went straight to my study and opened the filing cabinet I hadn't touched in years. The drawer resisted at first, then slid out with a familiar scrape. Inside were folders arranged the way I'd always kept them: insurance, banking, legal, property. I laid them out on the dining table, one stack at a time. No rush, no panic. That was when I found the form. Life insurance beneficiary change, dated 6 months earlier. The signature at the bottom was mine. Almost. The letters were too careful, too deliberate. I'd never written my name that way, especially not the R. I took a photo with my phone and set it face down. Then I kept going. Bank statements, small transfers, 30 here, 50 there. Then larger, always just under the amount that would trigger a call. A power of attorney I'd never signed, medical authorizations I'd never seen, notes describing confusion, forgetfulness, decline. Someone had been writing my story without me. I sat down slowly and folded my hands in my lap. Years ago, I used to tell my students that history wasn't just dates and battles. It was patterns, behavior, motive layered over opportunity. This wasn't impulsive. This was planned. By the time the sun dropped low enough to cast long shadows across the table, I had arranged everything in neat rows. Evidence has a way of calming the mind when you let it speak for itself. My phone buzzed once. A text from Evan. "Hope you're feeling better. We'll talk when we land." I didn't reply. Instead, I opened a notebook I hadn't used since my last semester teaching. On the first clean page, I wrote a single line: Step 1, observe. Then I waited. The house stayed quiet. No doors, no footsteps. Just the slow ticking of the clock on the wall and the knowledge that the people who wanted me gone believed they were still ahead. That was fine. I had no intention of correcting them yet. I closed the notebook, turned off the light in the dining room, and went back into my study. Tomorrow, I would make a call. And after that, I would make a plan. Then I waited. The call I made the next morning wasn't emotional. It was procedural. I waited until 10, poured a second cup of coffee, and sat at my desk with the folders lined up in front of me. Blue tab for banking, green for insurance, yellow for medical. The same color system I'd used for decades of grading. I dialed Caleb Morris, an attorney I'd met years earlier at a retirement seminar. Estate law, quiet reputation, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke. His assistant put me through without hesitation. "Ron," Caleb said after I explained why I was calling, "before you go any further, tell me one thing. Are you safe right now?" "Yes," I said. "They're out of town." There was a pause, not alarmed, focused. "Good," he said. "Then bring everything you have, originals if possible, and don't tell anyone you're doing it." That was the first moment the ground shifted. Not dramatically, just enough to know I wasn't alone in the room anymore. By noon, I was sitting across from him in his office, the smell of old leather and printer ink in the air. He didn't interrupt as I laid the documents out one by one. He didn't react when I mentioned the recording. He just nodded and took notes in tight, efficient lines. When he reached the forged power of attorney, he stopped. "You never signed this," he said. "No." "And you never authorized a beneficiary change?" "No." He looked up at me then, really looked. "This is felony-level fraud," he said, "and combined with what you're describing on that plane, it's worse." I didn't respond. I let him finish the thought himself. He leaned back slightly. "They didn't just plan for something to happen, they planned for control afterward." "Yes," I said. He slid the papers into a fresh folder and labeled it carefully. "Then we do this in order." He wrote on a legal pad, numbering as he went. "Step 1, he said. "We secure your assets, quietly, no alerts yet." I nodded. "Step 2, we document everything, redundancies, off-site copies." I nodded again. "Step 3, he said, tapping the pen once. "We let them continue behaving the way they already are." That was the moment I understood the advantage. Not power, not leverage. Time. They think the plan failed, I said. Not that it's exposed. Caleb gave a small, tight smile. Then they'll make mistakes. That afternoon, we froze nothing publicly. Instead, we flagged accounts internally. Silent markers, audit trails. He contacted a forensic accountant he trusted. I drove home with a sense of order settling in. Not relief, exactly. Alignment. By the time Evan and Lena returned 2 days later, I was ready to be ordinary. I asked about the flight. I apologized for the scare. I let Lena hand me a glass of water and watched her eyes carefully as I drank it. She smiled. Too quickly. I noticed small things after that. Lena lingering near my mail. Evan asking questions about passwords he already knew. A casual comment about simplifying paperwork. I answered slowly, thoughtfully, sometimes incorrectly on purpose. Confusion, when controlled, is useful. At night, after they went to bed, I moved quietly through the house. I didn't take documents anymore. I took copies, photos, screenshots, logs. I installed 2 cameras first, then 4. By the end of the week, there were 10. Smoke detectors, bookshelves, the corner of the living room they never looked at. No blinking lights, no obvious wiring. I told them it was for my safety. They agreed immediately. That told me more than any recording could have. One night, while reviewing footage, I heard Lena's voice from the dining room. "The plane should have worked," she said, irritated now. The calm was gone. "Now we have to push the other angle." Evan didn't argue. He rarely did anymore. "What if he resists?" he asked. "He won't," she said. "He already doubts himself." I closed the laptop gently and sat back. That was when I wrote the next line in my notebook. Step 2, let them talk. The following week, Caleb called. "They've tried to access your accounts," he said, multiple times. I smiled faintly, alone in my study. "Good," I said. "Then they've noticed the door is locked." "Yes," he said, "but they don't know who locked it." I walked to the window and looked out at my yard. The grass needed trimming. The day was clear. "How long?" I asked. "As long as you can stay patient." I had taught patience for 40 years. "I can," I said. After the call, I put my phone face down on the desk. Then I waited. Upstairs, I heard Evan pacing. Downstairs, Lena made a call she thought no one could hear, and in my study the cameras kept recording, quietly, relentlessly. I stopped thinking in terms of feelings after that, not because they weren't there, but because they weren't useful. What mattered was sequence. I wrote it out one morning while the coffee brewed. Step 1, stay predictable. Step 2, collect without interrupting. Step 3, let systems speak. I left the notebook open on my desk, then closed it again. No reason to tempt myself into rereading it. Over the next 10 days, I became exactly who they expected me to be. I misplaced my glasses once, on purpose. Asked Evan to remind me of the Wi-Fi password I'd memorized years ago. Let Lena hand me my evening pills, thanked her, swallowed them, and later checked the camera feed to confirm the look on her face. Satisfaction, brief, controlled. Every night after the house went quiet, I reviewed the footage. Not all of it, just enough to log timestamps and label files. Dining room, 9:42 p.m., living room, 11:18 p.m., kitchen, audio only. Caleb's accountant flagged more transfers, not new ones, attempted ones, access denied, password resets requested, calls made to banks that didn't authorize anything. Pressure was building. It showed in Evan first. His sleep schedule slipped. Coffee at midnight. Pacing at 3 in the morning. I'd catch him standing in the hallway, staring at my door like he was calculating distance. Lena stayed composed longer. She always did. But even she started rushing sentences, finishing Evan's thoughts, correcting him sharply when he misspoke. One afternoon, my phone rang. "Mr. Harris?" a pleasant voice said. "This is Dr. Morrison's office. We're calling to schedule a cognitive assessment." I held the phone away from my ear for half a second, then brought it back. "That's thoughtful," I said. "What prompted it?" "A family concern," the voice replied smoothly. "Of course," I said. "Tomorrow works." When I hung up, I didn't react right away. I just sat there, listening to the refrigerator hum. Then I called Caleb. No licensed physician under that name, he said after a pause. Address? I gave it to him. Temporary office space, he said. Paper sign, no registration. I looked down at my notebook and added a short line. Step 4. Parallel truth. The fake appointment came first. The office was exactly what Caleb described. Folding chairs, no diplomas, a man asking questions designed to lead, not learn. I recorded everything. The next morning I sat in a real office, hardwood floors, soft light, a psychiatrist with 30 years of experience who asked questions carefully and waited for full answers. At the end, she set her pen down. You're fully competent, she said. Clear reasoning, strong recall. I thanked her, collected the report, and drove home. That afternoon, Evan was waiting on the porch. He held an envelope like it weighed more than paper should. For your protection, he said. We just want to help. Inside were guardianship papers, claims of confusion, witness statements, medical evaluations I'd never received. I read them slowly, then I looked up. Whose safety? I asked. He didn't answer. He just turned and left. That evening, Caleb came over. We spread everything out on the dining table, the same table Lena had once asked about my insurance at. They're escalating, he said. We should file criminal charges now. Not yet, I said. They still think control is possible. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. All right, but once the court orders an evaluation, I'll be ready, I said. That night, after they went to bed, I listened to them argue downstairs. This is your fault, Lena said sharply. You rushed it, Evan snapped back. We go forward, she said. Full guardianship. I recorded every word. Then I turned off the screen and sat in the dark for a moment longer than necessary. In the morning, I requested a full bank audit, quietly, thoroughly. When the file arrived days later, thick and heavy, I set it beside the others and didn't open it right away. I made lunch instead, cleaned the counter, took my time. When I finally sat down, I opened the folder and began highlighting, line by line, transaction by transaction. Outside, the afternoon light shifted. Inside, the case finished building itself. And upstairs, I heard Evan's computer chime again. Another access denied. Then, silence. I closed the folder, placed it neatly on the stack, and turned off the lamp. The next step would require witnesses, and they were already talking. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. I dressed the way I always had for parent-teacher conferences. Pressed jacket, plain tie, shoes polished, but not new. Nothing that tried to say anything on my behalf. Caleb met me on the courthouse steps. He didn't offer reassurance. He didn't need to. Inside, the room felt smaller than it looked in photographs. Wood benches, soft echoes, a low hum from the lights overhead. Ordinary people waiting for ordinary problems. Across the aisle, Evan sat beside Lena and an attorney I didn't recognize. Evan's knee bounced. Lena sat very still, hands folded, eyes forward. When the judge entered, everyone stood. The claims were read aloud in a steady voice. Cognitive decline, financial confusion, risk to self. I listened without interrupting. When it was time, the judge looked at me. Mr. Harris, do you understand the nature of these proceedings? Yes, I said. Do you contest the petition? Yes. No speech. No emotion. Just the answer. Caleb stood and handed documents to the clerk. The independent evaluation, the video transcript, the financial audit summary. The judge read silently for a long time. Lena shifted in her seat. Finally, the judge looked up. The court orders an independent evaluation by Dr. Elaine Porter, he said. Until then, no guardianship is granted. All financial access remains solely with Mr. Harris. The gavel came down once. That was it. Outside, the hallway filled with sound again. Lawyers talking, phones ringing, shoes on tile. Lena spoke first. Ron, we're just trying to help you. I looked at her the way I used to look at students who insisted they'd misunderstood the assignment. I know, I said. That's why everything's documented. She didn't reply. That afternoon, the bank called Evan. I didn't hear the conversation, but I heard the end of it. The way the door closed too hard. The way his footsteps paced the living room afterward. That night, they talked freely. Too freely. "Everything's locked," Evan said. "All of it." "Then we push harder," Lena replied. "We accelerate." I didn't interrupt. I didn't move. I recorded. The next morning, Dr. Porter arrived at my home. Neutral, professional, no connection to anyone involved. We sat at the dining table, same chair, same light. She asked questions. I answered them. We reviewed timelines, decisions, reasoning. When she finished, she closed her folder. "There is no impairment," she said plainly. "You are fully capable." Her report arrived 2 days later. Signed, sealed. Caleb filed immediately. That was when the system finally moved without us touching it. Accounts formally froze. Retroactively flagged. Transfers reversed. Notifications sent. Evan's phone started ringing. Mine stayed quiet. Late that evening, Evan knocked on my study door. "Dad," he said, "we need to talk." I gestured to the chair across from me. He sat, rubbed his hands together, then stopped. "I didn't know how bad it got," he said. "The debt, the pressure." I waited. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said. I nodded once. "But you planned for it," I said calmly. "And you let it continue." Silence filled the room, heavy but contained. Lena stood in the hallway, listening. "I've already spoken to the authorities," I said. "Not emotionally, procedurally." Evan looked up sharply. "There are recordings," I continued. "Documents, timelines, independent verification." I slid one folder across the desk. I didn't open it. "You can cooperate," I said. "Or you can let the process proceed without you." That was the confrontation. No shouting, no threats. Just reality placed on the table and left there. Evan stood slowly. His face had gone pale. "We need a lawyer," Lena said from the doorway. "Yes," I said. "You do." After they left the room, I closed the folder and turned off the desk lamp. The house was quiet again. Outside, a car started and drove away. I didn't follow it with my eyes. I stayed where I was. The next call would come soon, and it would not be from family. The call came the next morning, just after 8. It wasn't dramatic. No raised voices, no urgency in the tone. "Mr. Harris," the woman said, "this is Detective Rowan with the County Financial Crimes Unit. We've received a referral connected to your accounts." "Yes," I said. "I was expecting that." She paused briefly, then continued. "We'd like to come by today, if that's convenient." "It is," I said. "I'll be home." They arrived at 10. 2 detectives, plain clothes, notebooks out, phones face down on the table. They didn't rush me. They didn't interrupt. I handed them the folders in order. Bank audit first, then insurance, then medical records, then recordings, labeled with dates and times. I didn't explain more than necessary. I didn't speculate. I answered only what was asked. When they listened to the audio from the airport restroom, neither of them reacted outwardly. They just wrote more slowly. "That recording," one of them said. "Where did it come from?" "A flight attendant," I said. "She'll cooperate." They nodded. When they left, one of them paused at the door. "You did this the right way," he said. "Most people don't." I closed the door behind them and stood there for a moment longer than necessary. Then I went back to the dining table and cleared the folders into a single stack. That afternoon, Evan and Lena were served. It happened quietly. No scene, no raised voices, just paperwork handed over and signatures requested. Lena called me once. "We can explain this," she said. "There's been a misunderstanding." "There hasn't," I said. "That's why it's written down." She didn't call again. Over the next weeks, everything unfolded the way systems do when you stop interfering with them. Charges filed, accounts restored, transfers traced and reversed. The guardianship petition was dismissed with prejudice, permanently. Evan's attorney contacted Caleb twice, both times asking for consideration, both times receiving the same response. The evidence didn't change. When the case finally reached court, it felt smaller than I expected, quieter, less personal. The judge reviewed documents. Experts testified. The recordings were played. I spoke once, briefly, only to confirm facts. The verdict came without surprise. Fraud, forgery, conspiracy. Sentencing followed later. Restitution ordered. Professional consequences applied where they belonged. I didn't attend the final hearing. Caleb did that for me. Instead, I stayed home. I cleaned my study that morning, not aggressively, just carefully. I filed the last document and labeled the box with the date. Then I put it in the back of the closet. Not hidden, finished. That afternoon I made tea and sat by the window. The house felt like itself again. No footsteps upstairs, no voices in the hallway, just the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of a lawnmower somewhere down the street. In the quiet, I noticed something I hadn't felt in months. Ownership, not just of the house or the accounts, but of time, of decisions, of silence. My phone buzzed once, a message from Caleb. "It's done," he wrote. I put the phone face down, then I waited. The next morning I woke up before sunrise. Not because I had to, just because my body finally rested enough to let me. I made coffee the way I always had. Same mug, same routine. I stood at the kitchen counter and watched the light come in slowly through the window, touching the edge of the table where so many papers had once been spread out. After breakfast, I did something small but necessary. I cleaned. Not in a rushed way. Not like erasing a mess. More like restoring order. I wiped the dining table until the wood shone again. I put the chairs back where they belonged. In my study, I took down the last temporary notes from the corkboard and returned my books to their shelves. History back where it belonged. The box with the case files stayed in the closet. Labeled, closed, not hidden, just complete. That afternoon, I walked to the corner hardware store and bought a new lock for the study door. The clerk asked if I needed help installing it. "No," I said. "I've got it." I took my time with it, measured twice, tightened the screws carefully. When it was done, I tested it once, then left it unlocked. I didn't need it locked anymore. In the days that followed, life became quiet in a way that felt earned. Mail arrived that was just mail. Phone calls were about ordinary things. The house stopped feeling like it was holding its breath. One evening, I found myself thinking about a former colleague, another retired teacher, who had mentioned trouble with a nephew managing his finances. At the time, I'd listened politely and changed the subject. Now I made a note to call him, not to warn him, just to ask how things were going. Sometimes people don't need saving. They just need someone calm enough to help them slow down and look. That night, I sat in my study with a notebook open and wrote one last line beneath the others. Final step, return to routine. I closed the notebook and placed it back in the drawer where it belonged. Later, before bed, I stood in the doorway of the study and looked around once more. The desk was clear. The lamp was off. The room was mine again. I slept well. And in the morning, when the house filled with light, it felt like a place meant to be lived in, not managed, not monitored, just lived in. If you stayed with me through this story, thank you. If you found it calming, or familiar, or quietly reassuring, you might want to like the video and subscribe. It helps this little corner of calm storytelling keep going. And if you're watching, let me know in the comments what city you're in and what time it is right now where you are. I read more of those than you might think. 2 more stories will appear next, chosen by the community. I think you'll recognize something in them too. Take care of yourself, and don't rush.